with boxing too, is that all guys are overpaid. And every time they put on a fight, it's a going out of business sale.
Dana White just dropped $15 million on a boxer who's never worn a world championship belt, while his UFC fighters still scrape by on $10,000 show money, and now they're breaking their silence. It's not fair, it's predatory. There is no argument there. Now we're a bunch of fucking idiots. You take our clothes off and go fight. What began as individual frustration has evolved into something organized, and their next move could disrupt the entire promotion. Let's examine the details. The deal that shattered everything. February 20th, 2026, saw Zuffa Boxing drop a single sentence on their X account that exploded throughout combat sports. The post announced, "More top talent has signed with Zuffa Boxing. Welcome to the fam at Conor Nigel." Within hours, millions had seen it. Conor Benn, the 29-year-old British welterweight with a 24-1 record, abandoned Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing for Dana White. The contract, reportedly $15 million for one fight. Veteran boxing insider Dan Raphael provided that figure, with multiple outlets confirming it. Sports Illustrated's Chris Mannix verified it as at minimum an 8-figure arrangement. Here's what this really means. Conor Benn holds no world titles. He served 2 years suspended over a doping controversy involving clomiphene, a banned testosterone-boosting substance. Double positive tests in 2022 forced cancellation of his scheduled Chris Eubank Jr. bout days before the event. Provisional suspension followed, then clearance, then appeal suspension, finally cleared in November 2024 when UK anti-doping couldn't prove intentional use. He never fully explained those positive tests, yet Dana White just handed him $15 million for one night's work. Compare that to UFC fighter earnings. Entry-level fighters still earn $10,000 to win, unchanged since approximately 2016, maximum $20,000 if victorious. After training camp expenses ranging $10,000 to $15,000 per fight, plus taxes, travel, management fees, and medical costs, debut fighters often walk away with virtually nothing. In 2024, 43% of UFC fighters earned under $45,000 annually. 2025's highest-paid UFC fighter was Dricus du Plessis at approximately $7.14 million across multiple title fights throughout the year. Conor Benn will earn more than double that for 15 to 25 minutes in a boxing ring. One social media post captured the mathematics that infuriated people, pointing out Conor Benn's single-fight payday equals what Islam Makhachev, Alex Pereira, and Khamzat Chimaev earned combined over the previous year. All three are UFC champions or title contenders fighting multiple times annually, risking brain damage in a cage under the same corporate umbrella, TKO Group Holdings, that owns both UFC and Zuffa Boxing. That detail stung most painfully. This wasn't rival promotion money being thrown around. This was Dana White's company. The same Dana White telling UFC fighters the promotion can't afford paying everyone millions.
You can't build a league like that. You can't build a sport. You can't have 750 fighters under contract making money.
Dana has repeatedly said that about boxing for years, claiming paying fighters too much destroys the business model.
I'm doing this for my family. It's an offer that you'd be mentally ill to turn down. So for me, I'm blessed to be in the position I'm in.
Yet his own boxing promotion just paid one non-champion $15 million for a single fight. The contradiction wrote itself, and the UFC roster witnessed it in real time. Benn didn't hide from the money. In his Boxing King media interview shortly after signing, he spoke directly about leaving Matchroom.
Like the UFC is the most, as far as the pay scale, there is no, you compare it to any other sporting event, the UFC is the most fucked up.
He later provided context about promoter loyalty limitations. That rhetorical question landed differently depending on which side of the TKO umbrella you occupied. For Benn, it justified his decision. For UFC fighters earning $20,000 per fight, it reflected the reality that their boss could write $15 million checks when motivated. The fighters who voiced opposition, the UFC backlash wasn't coordinated activism. It was raw, frustrated individual fighters reaching breaking points at different moments for slightly different reasons, all circling the same fundamental issue. They're underpaid, and now there's a $15 million receipt proving it. Sean Strickland provided the loudest voice. Strickland, former UFC middleweight champion and one of the roster's most recognizable names, sat with Complex in February 2026, days before his main event against Anthony Hernandez at UFC Fight Night in Houston. The interviewer asked a simple question about excitement over new bonuses announced with the Paramount Plus deal. That set the tone for everything following. Strickland didn't dance around it. He called the UFC's pay structure exactly what he believed it was.
If you compare it to like pay versus athletes versus what they're making, there is no argument there. It is like, it's not fair. It's predatory.
That word, predatory.
He wasn't speaking metaphorically, laying it out as direct comparison to every other professional sport.
Well, I would just like it to match any other sporting event. Any other sporting event on how much they're making, we should get paid.
That became the headline, and Strickland continued. When asked what fair compensation would look like, his answer was straightforward.
Like what I'm saying is like, let's say the NFL they give 70% of the profits to I'm making this up.
He then referenced the NFL's revenue sharing model as baseline, acknowledging he was improvising numbers.
You say no to a fight, well, guess what? They're going to go find some fucking guy in some fucking sand pit. They'll do it for fucking 5-5.
That line.
The actual NFL figure is around 48%, negotiated through collective bargaining agreements the UFC lacks. Fighters receive roughly 16 to 20% of total UFC revenue. That's the core gap persisting over a decade. Strickland also explained why more fighters don't speak up. The answer isn't complicated: retaliation fear.
That's why you're slowly going to see the American roster die, because it's like outsourced by like people that you could live on.
This captured the entire leverage problem. If one fighter refuses, the UFC has hundreds of others willing to take fights for less. Strickland connected this directly to a trend he sees accelerating: declining American fighters on the roster.
How much is fucking rent in Vegas? Like $2,000, $1,600, $1,400. So it's like, once you pay your managers, your taxes, like, how the fuck are you supposed to live on that? Like, well, you could fight 4 times a year. Okay, so you go 3-1.
His point was economic. A fighter from Brazil or Central Asia can live on a $10,000 paycheck. An American fighter in Las Vegas, where rent alone runs $1,400, $2,000 monthly, cannot...
Man, to have 14 bonuses and not equal up to $1 million, it's not right. It's not right.
Then came the line circulating through every MMA forum and social media platform: "You'll make more money at Walmart." That was an exaggeration. A full-time Walmart employee in Nevada earns roughly $30,000 annually. A UFC fighter on $10,000 contracts fighting 3 times and winning twice grosses $50,000. But after camp costs, taxes, management fees, and medical bills, the net can fall below Walmart wages. Strickland wasn't alone. Justin Gaethje, former interim lightweight champion and BMF title holder with 14 career bonuses, spoke during UFC 324 Media Day in January 2026. The Paramount deal had just activated. Daniel Cormier, UFC commentator and former champion, publicly stated everyone would earn more under the new deal. Gaethje pushed back directly.
It should be a lot more than that, and I should have had opportunities to do smarter things with my money, but I don't, and I haven't. And to this day, everyone's, I hear Daniel Cormier saying that everybody's going to get paid more on this card.
14 performance bonuses across a career. The violent highlight reel finishes the UFC uses in promos to sell pay-per-views. The total didn't even reach $1 million. Gaethje then addressed the Paramount deal directly.
And had been, in the works for about a...
Then came the sentence contradicting everything Dana White promised about the new era. "I'm not getting $1 more than I would have if this deal did not happen. Not $1 more." That was Gaethje's lived experience of the supposedly transformative $7.7 billion Paramount deal. These weren't anonymous Reddit complaints. These were 2 of the most recognizable, marketable fighters on the active UFC roster, speaking on camera, on record, days before fights. They weren't making theoretical arguments. They were describing their own paychecks. Beyond the active roster, retired fighters had made the same case for years. Demetrius Johnson, widely considered one of the greatest fighters ever, held the UFC flyweight title for years and defended it a record number of times. He described realizing how underpaid he'd been. He was gutted. One of the sport's greatest fighters, lying in bed doing career earnings math, realizing how little revenue he actually received. If he'd been an NBA player of equivalent stature, earnings wouldn't even compare. That's the point Conor Benn's $15 million deal drove home for every paying attention fighter. The money exists. It's just not going to them.
We'll learn more, but it does not appear as of now, based on the conversations that I've had, that the business practices of the UFC are going to change as a result.
No structural reform.
The system creating the gap between UFC fighters and boxers like Conor Benn didn't emerge overnight. It was constructed over 2 decades through exclusive contracts, corporate acquisitions, and a business model treating fighters as replaceable content machine parts. In the mid-2010s, the UFC kept an estimated 80 to 85% of event revenue, leaving fighters just 15 to 20%. The NFL player share is roughly 48%. The NBA is around 50%. Even in boxing, notorious for shady promoters and opaque finances, top fighters regularly command 50 to 70% of event revenue on major cards. The UFC didn't just pay fighters less, it actively eliminated alternatives. When rival promotions emerged, the UFC bought and shut them down. Pride FC was acquired in 2007. Strikeforce was absorbed in 2011. Each acquisition removed market competition and consolidated talent under one roof, reducing individual fighter leverage during negotiations. This pattern exactly led to the antitrust lawsuit. December 2014 saw class action suit Late et al. Versus Zuffa LLC filed in federal court in Nevada. Former fighters including Kung Lee, Nate Quarry, and John Fitch alleged the UFC violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by monopolizing the elite MMA market and systematically suppressing fighter pay. The suit claimed the UFC achieved this through exclusive contracts, coercion, and deliberate acquisition and shuttering of rival promotions. The case expanded, representing over 1,200 fighters who competed between December 2010 and June 2017. Experts estimated without the UFC's dominant market position, fighters could have earned 50% more. Potential damages calculated between $894 million and $1.6 billion. After a decade of legal battles, parties settled. A $335 million agreement initially rejected in 2024, then revised to $375 million and finalized early 2025. After legal fees, approximately $251 million was distributed. Top earners like Jorge Masvidal received over $1 million. Others received as little as $5,000. Fighter Renato Moicano opted out of his $200,000 share entirely, citing dissatisfaction with the amount relative to UFC profits. When the settlement was announced, Ariel Helwani, the world's most prominent MMA journalist, reacted live on the MMA Hour. His initial reaction captured widespread disappointment.
They pay you whatever they want to pay you.
And then the mechanism of control.
They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
A decade of litigation, and ultimately fighters received money, but the system remained unchanged.
Let's say 40 months contract. By 20 months, they will come to negotiate. A little bit more money if you say yes, yeah. Then they are giving you a new 40 months.
No mandatory revenue sharing, no union recognition, just a payout. The UFC continued operating exactly as before. Meanwhile, unionization efforts consistently failed. The Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association in 2008 went nowhere. The Professional Fighters Association and Mixed Martial Arts Athletes Association both launched in 2016 and both dissolved. Project Spearhead, in 2018, led by fighter Leslie Smith, tried gathering enough signatures for NLRB recognition, but fell short, partly because UFC contract clauses discouraged collective action. Francis Ngannou, former UFC heavyweight champion, who left the promotion in 2023, rather than accept what he considered an inadequate deal, explained the structural trap on PBD podcast. The system, he said, is designed so fighters feel like they're negotiating when they're not.
You're kind of like broke, you're struggling, and then you're seeing your next fight, okay, 50,000, you have to pay this and pay that and get away with maybe 20,000.
He described the cycle. Fighters sign long contracts. Midway through, the UFC offers slight raises in exchange for completely resetting the contract clock.
It's really hard to turn that down when you're in that position.
Yeah.
You know, even though you know that that's not your value.
The fighter gets a small bump. The UFC gets another 40 months of control, and by the time the fighter's market value has tripled, they're still locked in at a fraction of their worth.
Why do you think the UFC gets so much flack for not paying their fighters?
Because I don't tell anybody what they get paid. I don't tell anybody what they get paid, and guess what? Neither do the fighters.
When a new contract offer comes, say $100,000, a fighter living on $20,000 net per fight can't afford refusal.
Is there going to be a Zuffa belt where, like, the winner of the Zuffa belt has a springboard into like Riyadh season?
And the answer was blunt.
Right, of
Exactly
course.
what will happen.
Of course, yeah. Right.
There will be a Zuffa belt, and then there will be a ring belt. And yes, I will not recognize any of the other sanctioning bodies.
That's the system Conor Benn never dealt with. He got a one-fight deal, $15 million guarantee, and freedom to walk away afterward. UFC fighters get locked in for years, paid fractions of market value, and punished for pushing back. Dana White's response to fighter pay questions has been consistent and consistently deflecting.
I actually received an email
from Conor Benn's lawyer to make me aware of it. That I'm not going to sit here and hang Conor Benn out to dry. But I've got to be honest with you, me personally, pretty devastated.
That was his answer. Not rebutting numbers or defending revenue splits, just nobody talks about it, so nobody really knows. The fighters know. As of February 2026, they're watching Dana White write $15 million checks to boxers under the same corporate roof.
And like you know, it's not often you get shocked. And I blame myself. I blame myself because I forgot it was boxing, you know?
To fully understand why the Conor Benn deal hit UFC fighters so hard, you need to understand what Zuffa Boxing represents. The regular series launched January 2026. Zuffa Boxing 01 on January 23rd, headlined by Callum Walsh, took place at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. Subsequent cards followed quickly. Zuffa Boxing 02 on February 1st, Zuffa Boxing 03 on February 15th, with plans for the promotion's first championship fight at Zuffa Boxing 04 on March 8th. Jai Opeta versus Braden Glanton for the inaugural Zuffa Cruiserweight title. White announced his own belt system on camera, explicitly stating he wouldn't recognize traditional sanctioning bodies.
He will say, well, it was a big offer, right? But, you know, when I received the email from his lawyer, I texted him and said, I think we should have a call. I think you, for everything I've done for you, I think I deserve a call. And he said no.
The media infrastructure matched the ambition. Zuffa Boxing secured a landmark 5-year exclusive deal with Paramount, announced September 2025, valued at $100 million annually. All regular cards stream on Paramount+, with select events simulcast on CBS. White planned 12 or more cards in 2026, plus 2 to 3 super fights annually, with a roster target of 200 fighters across multiple divisions. This is where Conor Benn's $15 million comes from. Saudi capital, funnel worth through Sella, combined with Paramount broadcast revenue, deployed by Dana White to poach talent from traditional boxing promoters. The strategy is transparent. Sign affordable young prospects to build long-term stars, supplement them with proven names for immediate credibility and headlines. Benn falls squarely into the second category, a proven pay-per-view draw in the UK market, giving Zuffa instant European credibility. But here's the contradiction UFC fighters can't ignore. Standard Zuffa Boxing contracts detailed in a 31-page agreement reported by The Guardian reveal terms mirroring UFC-style control. Multi-year exclusivity, perpetual likeness rights, Zuffa-designated opponents, arbitration clauses preventing class action lawsuits, and revenue share for regular fighters of roughly 17 to 20%. Minimum pay was reported as $200 per round, with purses ranging from $15,000 for unranked fighters to $500,000 for title defenses. Former featherweight champion Jamel Herring reacted to the rumored pay scale with disbelief, questioning whether any top talent would actually sign those terms. But the point remains, the vast majority of Zuffa Boxing fighters aren't getting anything close to $15 million. That money is reserved for splashy signings designed to build the brand. Everyone else operates under structure remarkably similar to the UFC model fighters have protested for a decade. Eddie Hearn, who lost Benn to Zuffa, seized on this contradiction immediately. In days following the announcement, Hearn launched sustained public attacks on the disparity between what Zuffa pays boxers and what the UFC pays fighters. He declared UFC fighters are getting ripped off and predicted they would feel sick seeing Benn's payday. He warned of consequences for Dana White, arguing the deal would erode fighter morale across the UFC roster. Hearn also got personal about how the split happened. In his first extended interview after the announcement, he described learning about it via email from Benn's lawyer.
Not because the UFC has the power to cut you. I'm going on strike. Oh, really? You're doing that?
He blamed himself for trusting loyalty over contracts in a business rewarding neither.
But, yeah, no, I mean, again, I'm grateful for the UFC. I'm grateful this exists. I make more money now than I could have ever dreamed of making in any other life path I would choose. I am grateful, but it doesn't change the fact.
He described asking for a phone call, a conversation between two men who worked together for a decade, and being told no. Dana White's response to Hearn was characteristically blunt. He branded Hearn a liar in a press conference, mocked him for crying to the media, and dismissed the emotional fallout as irrelevant to business. The promoter war between the two men is now fully personal, fully public, and fully tied to the question of fighter compensation. The question becomes, does any of this actually change anything? The UFC's new Paramount deal, 7 years, $7.7 billion, roughly $1.1 billion annually, roughly doubled what ESPN was paying. Dana White promised fighters would benefit. The most visible change came January 24, 2026, when White announced doubling post-fight bonuses from $50,000 to $100,000 for Performance of the Night and Fight of the Night awards. He also introduced a brand new $25,000 finish bonus, paid to any fighter scoring a stoppage but not winning main awards. The minimum bonus pool per event went from approximately $200,000 to $400,000, with potential to climb higher on cards with multiple finishes. On the surface, these are meaningful improvements. For a mid-card fighter earning $50,000 to show and scoring a knockout, that extra $25,000 represents significant improvement. White framed bonus increases as low-hanging fruit, the first and easiest step in a process he said would continue throughout the 7-year deal. The unionization question also remains unresolved. Every previous attempt to protest low wages failed. Francis Ngannou described this trap perfectly. The fighter needing the next $50,000 paycheck to cover training debts can't afford joining a strike, and the UFC knows it. That's the mechanism. Threaten to strike and you're released. Your next paycheck disappears. The fighter below you on rankings takes your spot for 12 and 12. Nobody's doing that. You're out. Then you don't even have that $60,000 anymore. But the Benn deal may have shifted the calculus in ways previous controversies didn't. When the pay gap was abstract, percentages of revenue, comparisons to other sports leagues, arguments about independent contractor status, it was easy for fighters to compartmentalize. When the pay gap is a single social media post showing Dana White just paid a boxer $15 million while their last paycheck was $20,000, it becomes personal. Social media reactions after the announcement reflected the shift. Fans and fighters pointed to the dual-system hypocrisy. One ex-post captured the sentiment with brutal simplicity. Talk to Dana and his bosses. Zuffa and Dana just gave Conor Benn a ton of money. Seems they can pay their boxers, but not their MMA fighters. Others noted, can't get any of the champions to sign with Zuffa, so signs a mid-level boxer with a bit of notoriety to try and draw eyes to their product and has to overpay. Happy for Benn on this windfall. Hopefully this finally opens the eyes of UFC fighters to their reality. Whether it actually opens their eyes, and more importantly, whether opening their eyes leads to action remains the central question. The UFC's model has survived a decade of lawsuits, multiple failed unionization attempts, and departure of its biggest heavyweight champion. It survived because the supply of fighters willing to work for low pay is essentially unlimited, and because no single fighter's absence has ever materially threatened the business. But the Paramount era is different. The UFC is worth more than ever. The revenue is public. Profit margins are documented, and the contrast with Zuffa Boxing makes the inequity impossible to deny. The $7.7 billion Paramount deal means the UFC takes in $1.1 billion annually from U.S. media rights alone, before international deals, gate revenue, sponsorships, and merchandise. If fighters received even 30% of total revenue instead of 16 to 20%, the per-fighter increase would be transformative. Sean Strickland acknowledged the paradox of his own position, grateful for what the UFC has given him, while fully aware the system is rigged against fighters like him. But that last line is where it all sits. Grateful, but it doesn't change the facts. The facts are $15 million for one boxer and $10,000 to show for a UFC debutante, both under the same corporate umbrella, both signed off by the same man. The fighters see it, the fans see it. The question is whether seeing it is enough to change it, or whether the UFC's structural advantages will continue keeping fighter pay exactly where it has been for the last decade. For now, bonuses are bigger, cards are on Paramount Plus, and Dana White says fighter pay is going to improve. But Conor Benn is about to cash a $15 million check, and the average UFC fighter is still calculating whether they can afford next month's rent. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.